A scream pierces the glittering Christmas masquerade at Hawthorne Manor, where a masked killer lurks among the revellers, and only Miss Marple's keen eye can unravel the deadly secret. Welcome to Miss Marple's Clue at the Christmas Masquerade, a chilling tale of mystery and deception. Grab a cup of tea, take a seat, and enjoy the story. If it hooks you, please subscribe, as your support means the world to us. Let's step into the shadows of the manor. Chapter 1. The invitation arrives. The frost-dusted village of St. Mary Mead hummed with the quiet rhythm of December, where Miss Jane Marple sat in her modest cottage, her knitting needles clicking like a metronome beside a crackling fire. The scent of mince pies wafted from the kitchen, blending with the faint mustiness of old books lining her shelves. It was a week before Christmas, and the world outside her window was a postcard of snow-draped rooftops and twinkling lanterns. But tranquility, as Miss Marple knew too well, often hid secrets waiting to be unravelled. That morning, as she sipped her Earl Grey, a postman's knock broke the silence. An envelope, crisp as the winter air, slid through the letterbox, its wax seal embossed with the ornate crest of Hawthorne Manor. Miss Marple's thin fingers traced the seal, her sharp eyes glinting with curiosity. The invitation inside was penned in elegant script. Lord and Lady Hawthorne request the pleasure of your company at a grand Christmas masquerade ball on December 24th. Masks mandatory, secrets optional. A faint smile curved her lips. Secrets, she thought, were never truly optional in such circles. Miss Marple leaned back in her armchair, her mind already sifting through fragments of gossip about the Hawthornes, gleaned from her nephew Raymond and the village's ever-churning rumour mill. Lord Archibald Hawthorne, a steel magnate with a fortune as vast as his temper, ruled his family with an iron grip. His wife, Lady Evelyn, was a vision of charm, but whispers spoke of her flirtations with younger men, a scandal barely contained by her husband's wealth. Their son, Reginald, was a charming wastrel, drowning in gambling debts and known for late-night brawls in London's shadier clubs. Then there was Clarissa, their daughter, recently engaged to Victor Kane, a suave foreigner whose murky past, something about a failed business in Vienna, set tongues wagging. Why, Miss Marple wondered, would such a prominent family invite a spinster from St. Mary Mead to their glittering affair? Her instincts, honed by years of unravelling village intrigues, sensed a puzzle beneath the festive veneer. Let's pause for a practical tip. If you're ever invited to an event that feels out of place, trust your gut. Motives matter. A lavish invitation might be a gesture of kindness, or it could be bait to draw you into a game you don't yet understand. Miss Marple, for instance, recalled a seemingly innocent tea at the vicarage 2 years ago, where a poisoned scone exposed a jealous wife's plot to eliminate her rival. Invitations, she knew, could be the first move in a dangerous chess match. As she folded the letter, her thoughts turned to the guest list, pieced together from snippets dropped by her chatty maid, Dolly. There'd be the Hawthornes' inner circle, old friends like Colonel Bantry, a retired military man with a penchant for tall tales, and his wife, Dolly, who loved gossip as much as Miss Marple pretended not to. Then there were the newcomers, a reclusive artist named Margot Vale, whose eerie paintings unsettled even the boldest critics, and a journalist, Thomas Reed, whose sharp pen had ruined reputations across the county. Each name was a thread in a tapestry Miss Marple was already itching to unravel. She rose from her chair, moving with the deliberate grace of someone who knew haste clouded judgment. In her bedroom, she packed a small valise with practical woolens, a pair of sturdy shoes, and a magnifying glass cunningly disguised as a silver brooch, a gift from Raymond, who knew her sleuthing habits well. For example, that brooch had once helped her spot a forged signature on a will during a church fete, saving a widow from ruin. Miss Marple didn't believe in coincidences. This invitation was no random act. The Hawthorns, or someone close to them, wanted her at that ball, and she intended to find out why. As she locked her cottage door and stepped into the snowy lane, the train to Hawthorn Manor awaited, its whistle a distant call to adventure. The countryside blurred past her window later that day, a mosaic of white fields and skeletal trees, but her mind was elsewhere, already piecing together a puzzle with no clear edges. To wrap up this first chapter, Miss Marple's journey to Hawthorn Manor marks the start of a mystery where masks hide more than faces. The Christmas masquerade promises elegance, but beneath the chandeliers and laughter, something sinister stirs. Stay with us as we step into the grand hall, where the first clue awaits in the flicker of candlelight. Chapter 2. The grand arrival. Snow crunched underfoot as Miss Marple stepped off the train, her breath fogging in the crisp evening air. Hawthorn Manor loomed ahead, its stone facade aglow with golden light spilling from tall windows, a beacon against the darkening sky. Carriages and motorcars lined the drive, disgorging guests in velvet cloaks and feathered masks, their laughter mingling with the faint strains of a string quartet. Miss Marple adjusted her own mask, a simple black domino that left her keen eyes unobstructed, and smoothed her modest grey gown. The manor's entrance hall was a spectacle of opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across marble floors, and garlands of holly and ivy twined around gilded banisters. A towering Christmas tree, adorned with glass baubles and flickering candles, dominated the space, its scent sharp and resinous. Yet, beneath the festive splendour, Miss Marple sensed a tension, like a violin string wound too tight. Lord Archibald Hawthorn greeted guests at the foot of a grand staircase, his broad frame clad in a crimson mask and a tailored suit that spoke of wealth. His handshake was firm, but his eyes darted, scanning the crowd, as if searching for someone, or something. Lady Evelyn stood beside him, her emerald gown shimmering, her peacock-feathered mask unable to hide a smile that seemed more practiced than warm. Miss Marple offered a polite nod, noting the slight tremor in Lady Evelyn's hand as she clutched a champagne flute. The couple's son, Reginald, lounged nearby, his gold mask askew, a glass of whiskey already half empty in his hand. His sister Clarissa, radiant in a silver gown, clung to the arm of Victor Kane, whose black velvet mask and accented voice marked him as the enigmatic fiancé. Their greetings were cordial, but Miss Marple caught the flicker of unease in Clarissa's gaze when Victor whispered something in her ear. As she moved through the crowd, Miss Marple observed the other guests. Colonel Bantry, in a bear-like mask, was regaling a group with a story of his army days, his booming voice cutting through the chatter. His wife Dolly fluttered about in a butterfly mask, her laughter too loud, her eyes too sharp. The artist, Margot Vale, stood alone by a window, her skeletal frame draped in black, her mask a stark white skull that made guests shy away. Thomas Reed, the journalist, prowled the edges of the room, his fox mask suiting his sly demeanour as he scribbled notes in a small pad. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on him. His presence suggested a story brewing, perhaps one the Hawthorns wouldn't want told. The ballroom opened before her, a whirl of colour and motion as couples danced beneath a ceiling painted with cherubs and clouds. Waiters glided through the throng, offering trays of canapes and sparkling wine, but Miss Marple declined, preferring to keep her senses sharp. A sudden hush fell as Lord Hawthorn raised a glass for a toast, his voice booming with forced jollity. He spoke of tradition, family, and the joy of the season, but Miss Marple noticed his gaze linger on Victor Kane, who stood impassive, his hand resting lightly on Clarissa's waist. The toast ended, and the music resumed, but the moment left a chill. Miss Marple slipped into a quiet alcove, her eyes scanning the room. She overheard a snippet of conversation. Two masked guests whispering about a missing letter, one voice sharp with accusation, the other pleading. Before she could edge closer, a piercing scream cut through the music, freezing the dancers. It came from the library, a heavy oak door ajar at the far end of the hall. Guests murmured, some rushing toward the sound, others hesitating. Miss Marple moved swiftly, her heart steady despite the chaos. This chapter closes with the manor's festive glow, dimmed by that chilling scream, the first crack in the Masquerade's polished facade. Stay tuned as Miss Marple steps into the library, where a grim discovery awaits. Chapter 3. The Body in the Library. The library door creaked as Miss Marple pushed it open, her steps measured but swift, her black domino mask casting faint shadows across her face in the flickering candlelight. The room was a cavern of dark wood and leather-bound books, their spines glinting faintly on towering shelves that stretched to the vaulted ceiling. A massive fireplace roared at one end, its flames casting an eerie glow over the scene that had silenced the Masquerade's revelry. Sprawled across an oriental rug, near a mahogany desk cluttered with papers and an inkwell, lay Thomas Reed, the journalist. His fox mask had slipped, revealing a face frozen in shock, his eyes wide and unseeing. A letter opener, its silver handle engraved with the hawthorn crest, protruded from his chest, a dark stain spreading across his white shirt like spilled wine. The air held the metallic tang of blood, mingling with the musty scent of old books and the faint pine of Christmas wreaths hung on the walls. Guests crowded the doorway behind Miss Marple, their gasps and whispers a chaotic chorus, but she stood still, her mind already cataloguing every detail. Lord Hawthorne pushed through the crowd, his crimson mask now removed, revealing a face pale with fury or fear. Miss Marple couldn't yet decide. What in God's name happened here? He bellowed, his voice cracking as he knelt beside the body. Lady Evelyn followed, her peacock feathers trembling as she clutched her husband's arm, her eyes darting from the corpse to the faces in the room. Reginald, swaying slightly, his whiskey glass still in hand, muttered something incoherent, while Clarissa, clinging to Victor Kane, stifled a sob. Victor's expression was unreadable, his black velvet mask still in place, but his fingers tightened briefly on Clarissa's arm, a gesture Miss Marple noted with interest. Colonel Bantry, ever the soldier, barked for someone to fetch the local constable, while Dolly Bantry fanned herself, her butterfly mask askew, murmuring about the scandal this would cause. Margot Vale, the artist, lingered at the edge of the group, her skull mask giving her the appearance of a spectre, her thin lips pressed into a line as she stared at the body. Miss Marple knelt beside Thomas Reed, careful not to disturb the scene. The letter opener was plunged deep, suggesting force and intent, not a spur-of-the-moment act. His notebook, which she'd seen him scribbling in earlier, was missing from his jacket pocket, though a single torn page lay crumpled near his hand. She didn't touch it. Fingerprints, she knew, could tell tales, but she squinted at the faint ink scrawls visible. Hawthorne. Debt. Vienna. The words were fragmented, but they sparked a connection in her mind to the whispers she'd overheard about a missing letter. Had Reed been digging into something dangerous? His reputation as a journalist was for exposing secrets, bankruptcies, affairs, frauds. Perhaps he'd uncovered something the killer wanted buried. The desk nearby caught her eye. Papers were scattered, as if someone had rifled through them in haste. A crystal decanter of brandy sat untouched, but a single glass beside it was half empty, a faint smudge on its rim suggesting recent use. The constable, a stout man named Hargrove, arrived, puffing from the cold and clearly out of his depth. He cordoned off the room, barking orders to keep everyone back. But Miss Marple lingered, her presence unassuming yet deliberate. She noted the library's layout, 2 exits, one to the ballroom, now blocked by guests, and a smaller door leading to a side corridor, slightly ajar. A window, frosted with snow, was latched from the inside, ruling out an outsider's entry. The killer, she deduced, was among the masked guests, perhaps still watching her now. She caught Margot Vale's gaze, the artist's eyes cold and assessing, and wondered what stories those eerie paintings of hers might tell. Reginald, meanwhile, had slipped away from the group, his absence conspicuous as the constable began questioning guests. As Hargrove fumbled through initial inquiries, Miss Marple's mind raced. The letter opener was a Hawthorne heirloom, suggesting either convenience or a deliberate attempt to implicate the family. Reed's torn page hinted at a motive tied to secrets, perhaps financial ruin or a scandal from Victor's past in Vienna. The smudged glass raised another question. Had Reed been drinking alone, or had someone joined him before the fatal blow? She recalled the earlier scream, sharp, female but untraceable in the chaos. Clarissa's distress seemed genuine, but Lady Evelyn's trembling hands and Lord Hawthorne's darting eyes suggested more than shock. Even the Colonel's bluster felt forced, as if covering unease. This chapter draws to a close with the library sealed, the body still warm, and the Masquerade's festive mask shattered. Miss Marple steps back into the ballroom, where whispers of murder now dance with the music. Stay tuned as she begins to unravel the threads of this deadly puzzle, one careful observation at a time. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Ballroom. Miss Marple slipped back into the ballroom, where the festive glow of chandeliers and Christmas garlands now felt hollow. Like a stage set after the curtains fall, the string quartet had stopped, replaced by a low hum of anxious chatter as guests clustered in knots, their masks half removed, revealing flushed faces and darting eyes. The air was heavy with the scent of mulled wine and wax, but the mood had soured, the earlier merriment replaced by suspicion. Some guests lingered near the library door, craning for a glimpse of Constable Hargrove's bumbling investigation, while others huddled by the towering Christmas tree, whispering theories about the journalist's fate. Miss Marple moved quietly among them, her unassuming presence allowing her to blend into the background, her ears attuned to every murmured word. She knew the ballroom, with its swirling currents of gossip, was as rich with clues as the crime scene itself. She paused near a group of guests, catching fragments of conversation. A woman in a sapphire mask, her voice shrill, speculated that Thomas Reed had enemies aplenty, given his knack for exposing scandals. "He wrote about my cousin's bankruptcy last year," she hissed. "Ruined him without a shred of mercy." Her companion, a man with a hawk-like mask, nodded grimly, adding, "I heard he was sniffing around the Hawthorns' finances. Something about unpaid debts." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. The torn page with Hawthorne, debt, Vienna flashed in her mind. She drifted toward another cluster, where Colonel Bantry's booming voice dominated. "Nonsense," he declared, adjusting his bear mask. "Probably some vagrant who slipped in. These old manors have too many doors." His wife Dolly fluttered her fan, her butterfly mask now dangling from her wrist. "Oh, but the letter opener, dear. It's the Hawthorns' own. That's no vagrant's work." Her words, meant to be conspiratorial, carried too far, and Miss Marple noted the Colonel's quick glance toward Lord Hawthorne, who stood rigid by the fireplace, his face a mask of its own. Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Reginald, who had reappeared, his gold mask back in place, but his tie loosened, as if he'd been somewhere in a hurry. He was speaking to a waiter, his gestures sharp, almost frantic, and the waiter nodded before slipping away toward the kitchens. Miss Marple filed this away. Reginald's absence during the initial chaos was curious, and his nervous energy suggested more than grief. Nearby, Clarissa and Victor Kane stood apart, her silver gown catching the light as she leaned into him, her face pale. Victor's hand rested on her shoulder, but his eyes scanned the room, lingering briefly on Margot Vale, who was sketching something on a napkin with a pencil, her skull mask pushed atop her head. The artist's detachment intrigued Miss Marple. Most guests were rattled, but Margot seemed almost expectant, as if she'd foreseen this darkness. Miss Marple edged closer, pretending to admire a garland, and caught a glimpse of the sketch, a jagged outline resembling the letter opener's handle. Was it artistic impulse or something more? The ballroom's tension spiked as Constable Hargrove emerged from the library, his face red with effort. "No one leaves the manor," he announced, his voice unsteady. "We're searching for the notebook Reed carried. It's missing, and it may hold answers." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Miss Marple's mind raced. The notebook's absence confirmed her suspicion. Reed's death was no random act. Someone had taken it to hide what he'd uncovered. She recalled the smudged brandy glass and the side corridor's ajar door. Had the killer slipped out, notebook in hand, while the scream distracted the guests? She made her way toward the corridor, unnoticed amid the chaos, and found it led to a narrow staircase spiraling upward to the manor's private quarters. Footprints, faint in the dust, suggested recent passage, too large for a woman's shoe. A man, then, perhaps in a hurry. As she returned to the ballroom, Miss Marple overheard Lady Evelyn speaking to a guest, her voice low but strained. He was trouble, that Reed, always prying where he wasn't wanted. Her words were meant to sound casual, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Miss Marple wondered what Reed had uncovered about Lady Evelyn. Perhaps her rumoured indiscretions were more than gossip. The night was growing colder, the snow piling against the windows, trapping everyone in this web of secrets. Miss Marple felt the weight of unseen eyes, as if the killer were watching, gauging who might unravel their plan. This chapter ends with the ballroom a cauldron of suspicion, every glance and whisper a potential clue. Miss Marple, her mind sharp as ever, prepares to follow the trail to the manor's upper floors, where secrets lurk in the shadows. Stay tuned for what she uncovers next. Chapter 5. Shadows on the Staircase. Miss Marple glided toward the narrow corridor, her steps silent on the polished floor as she left the ballroom's anxious buzz behind. The staircase she'd glimpsed earlier spiraled upward, its stone steps worn smooth by centuries of hawthorn footsteps. Dim sconces cast long shadows, and the air grew colder, carrying a faint draught that stirred the hem of her grey gown. The manor's upper floors, reserved for the family's private quarters, were off-limits to guests. But Miss Marple's curiosity outweighed decorum. The footprints she'd spotted, large, smudged and fresh, suggested someone had fled the library in haste, perhaps with Thomas Reed's missing notebook. Her heart beat steadily, her senses sharp, as she climbed, one hand trailing the iron banister. The distant strains of the ballroom faded, replaced by the creak of old wood and the howl of wind battering the manor's walls. Snow pressed against the narrow windows, blurring the world outside into a white void. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched before her, lined with oak doors and faded portraits of stern-faced hawthorns glaring down from gilded frames. The air smelled of dust and lavender, a reminder of the manor's age and its mistress's attempts to mask it. Miss Marple paused, her eyes catching a faint scuff mark on the floor near a door marked with a brass plate. Lord Hawthorne's study. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of lamplight spilling into the hall. She approached, her breath shallow, and peered inside. The study was a masculine domain of leather armchairs, a cluttered desk, and shelves heavy with ledgers. Papers were strewn across the floor, as if someone had searched in a panic. A safe stood in one corner, its door closed but its handle gleaming as if recently touched. Miss Marple's gaze fell on a single glove, black leather, monogrammed with an R, lying discarded near the desk. Reginald's initial, she noted, though it could be a coincidence. A soft thud from deeper in the room made her freeze. She stepped back into the shadows, her back pressed against the wall, as footsteps approached. It was Victor Kane, his black velvet mask removed, revealing a sharp jaw and eyes that gleamed with intensity. He carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth, his movements quick but cautious. He glanced down the hall, not seeing Miss Marple, and slipped out, heading toward another staircase at the hall's end. She waited, counting to 10 before following. The second staircase led to a tower room, its door locked, but through a keyhole she glimpsed a flicker of movement. Victor, unwrapping the bundle to reveal a notebook. Reed's notebook, she was certain, its leather cover unmistakable. Victor tucked it into his coat and left, his steps echoing down the stairs. Miss Marple didn't pursue immediately. Haste, she knew, could ruin a careful plan. Instead, she returned to the study, her magnifying glass brooch in hand. The scattered papers revealed little, mostly business correspondence. But one crumpled sheet caught her eye, half hidden under the desk. It was a letter, unsigned, with the words, "Vienna debts must be paid or the truth will out." The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the threat was clear. Had Reed written it or received it? The glove, the safe, the letter, all pointed to secrets the Hawthorns, or someone close, wanted buried. She slipped the letter into her reticule, careful to leave the room as she found it. As she descended the staircase, voices drifted up from the ballroom, now tinged with frustration, as Constable Hargrove's questions grew repetitive. Miss Marple re-entered the crowd, her face composed, but her mind raced. Victor's possession of the notebook suggested he knew more than he let on, but was he the killer, or merely an opportunist? The glove implicated Reginald, whose absence earlier was still unexplained, and the letter's mention of Vienna tied back to Victor's shadowy past, a thread she needed to tug. The manor's walls seemed to close in, each shadow hiding a potential truth, or a threat. This chapter closes with Miss Marple back among the guests, the weight of her discoveries pressing on her. The notebook's trail leads deeper into the manor's secrets, and danger lurks closer than ever. Stay tuned as she follows the next clue, where alliances and betrayals come to light. Chapter 6. The Hidden Conversation. Miss Marple slipped back into the ballroom's restless crowd, her reticule heavier with the crumpled letter from the study, its cryptic words, "Vienna debts must be paid, or the truth will out," burning in her mind. The chandeliers flickered, casting jagged shadows across the polished floor, where guests milled about, their masks now mostly discarded, revealing faces taut with unease. The air was thick with the scent of spilled wine and wilting holly, the festive spirit long drowned by the spectre of murder. Constable Hargrove's voice echoed from a corner, his questions to a trembling maid yielding little but nervous stammers. Miss Marple, however, had no intention of relying on the constable's methods. Her eyes scanned the room, seeking the next thread in the tangled web. Victor Kane's swift departure with the notebook suggested he held a piece of the puzzle, but she needed more. Something to connect the dots between Reed's death, the Hawthorn family, and the whispers of Vienna. She spotted Lady Evelyn near a velvet-curtained alcove, her emerald gown catching the light as she spoke in hushed tones to Colonel Bantry. Their heads were close, too close for mere pleasantries, and Lady Evelyn's peacock feathers quivered as she gestured sharply. Miss Marple moved closer, feigning interest in a tray of mince pies offered by a passing waiter. She caught fragments of their conversation. "He knew too much," Lady Evelyn whispered, her voice tight. "If that notebook surfaces, it could ruin us." The Colonel's gruff reply was barely audible. "Keep your voice down, Evelyn. We'll handle it." Miss Marple's heart quickened. Handle what? She pretended to adjust her shawl, lingering just long enough to see Lady Evelyn slip a small key into the Colonel's hand before they parted, both glancing nervously at the crowd. The key, small and brass, gleamed briefly, its purpose a mystery Miss Marple was determined to unravel. Her attention shifted to Clarissa, who stood alone by the Christmas tree, her silver gown shimmering, but her face pale, her hands twisting a lace handkerchief. Victor was nowhere in sight, and Clarissa's eyes darted toward the staircase leading to the upper floors, as if expecting his return. Miss Marple approached, her voice gentle but probing. "My dear, you look troubled. Is everything all right?" Clarissa started, her eyes wide, then forced a smile. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's just This dreadful business with Mr. Reed. Victor went to fetch my shawl. He'll be back soon. Her words were too quick, her smile too brittle. Miss Marple nodded, noting the lie. Victor's hurried exit with the notebook was no errand for a shawl. Clarissa's distress hinted at secrets she might not fully understand herself. Miss Marple's gaze then fell on Margot Vale, who had retreated to a corner, her skull mask back in place, her pencil now scratching furiously in a small sketchbook. Curious, Miss Marple drifted closer, catching a glimpse of the page, a detailed drawing of the library, complete with a letter opener and a shadowy figure in a mask. The artist's precision was uncanny, almost as if she'd witnessed the murder. Miss Marple cleared her throat softly. "Your sketches are remarkable, Miss Vale. Do they tell a story?" Margot's eyes flicked up, cold and guarded. "They tell what I see," she said curtly, snapping the book shut. Her evasiveness only deepened Miss Marple's interest. Could Margot's detachment mask a deeper involvement? As the evening wore on, the ballroom grew stifling, the snow outside sealing the manor like a tomb. Miss Marple's mind churned, piecing together the fragments. The letter mentioning Vienna, Victor's possession of the notebook, Lady Evelyn's secret exchange with the Colonel, and Margot's unsettling sketches. Each clue pointed to a web of deceit, but the motive for Reed's death remained elusive. Had he uncovered a financial scandal, as the torn page suggested, or something more personal, tied to Lady Evelyn's whispered fears? And where was Reginald, whose monogrammed glove lay abandoned in the study? Miss Marple resolved to find him, suspecting his absence was no coincidence. This chapter ends with the manor's secrets tightening like a noose, each whispered word and furtive glance drawing Miss Marple closer to the truth. She prepares to seek out Reginald, whose actions may hold the key to the next revelation. Stay tuned as the mystery deepens, and the killer's shadow grows ever closer. Chapter 7. The Search for Reginald. Miss Marple moved through the ballroom's thinning crowd, her eyes searching for the flash of Reginald's gold mask, which had been conspicuously absent since his brief reappearance earlier. The air was heavy with tension, the scent of pine from the Christmas tree now mingling with the acrid tang of nervous sweat. Guests whispered in tight clusters, their voices low but urgent, as Constable Hargrove's men fumbled through their search for Reed's missing notebook, unaware that Victor Kane had already spirited it away. Miss Marple's mind was a whirl of connections. The monogrammed glove in the study, the threatening letter about Vienna debts, and Lady Evelyn's cryptic exchange with Colonel Bantry. Reginald, with his reckless habits and nervous demeanour, was a loose thread she needed to pull. His absence during the chaos after the murder and that glove suggested he was either hiding something or running from it. She slipped past a group of guests debating whether to defy Hargrove's order to stay put, their masks now crumpled in hands or abandoned on tables. The manor's vastness offered countless hiding spots, but Miss Marple's instincts led her toward the conservatory, a glass-walled haven at the manor's rear where Reginald was known to retreat during family gatherings, according to Dolly Bantry's earlier gossip. The conservatory door was tucked behind a heavy tapestry, and as Miss Marple eased it open, a wave of humid air greeted her, thick with the scent of orchids and damp earth. Moonlight filtered through the snow-dusted glass, illuminating rows of exotic plants and a marble fountain trickling softly. In the far corner, a shadow moved. Reginald, his gold mask discarded, his face slick with sweat as he paced, muttering to himself. His suit was rumpled, one glove missing, confirming Miss Marple's suspicion about the study. She stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Reginald, you seem distressed. Might I help?" He froze, his eyes wild like a cornered animal. "Miss Marple? I just needed air. This murder business, it's too much." His words stumbled, and she noted the tremor in his hands, the faint slur in his speech. Not just whiskey, perhaps, but fear. She pressed gently. "You were gone when the scream was heard, and I found a glove. monogrammed with an R, in your father's study. Care to explain? Reginald's face paled, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. I had lost it earlier. Must have dropped it. I wasn't in the library, I swear. His denial was too quick, his eyes avoiding hers. Miss Marple didn't push further. His panic was a clue in itself, but she needed more to tie him to Reed's death. A rustle from the shadows made them both turn. Dolly Bantry emerged, her butterfly mask dangling from her wrist, her face flushed with excitement. "Oh, Reginald, there you are!" And Miss Marple sleuthing as always. Her tone was playful, but her eyes were sharp, scanning Reginald's dishevelled state. "I saw you slip away earlier," she continued, "right after that awful scream. Were you avoiding the constable?" Reginald snapped, "Mind your own business, Dolly." But his outburst only deepened Miss Marple's curiosity. Dolly's presence here wasn't random. She'd been trailing him, perhaps fishing for gossip or something more. Miss Marple noted the way Dolly's fingers toyed with a pearl bracelet, a nervous habit that suggested she knew more than she let on. Before Miss Marple could probe further, a loud crash echoed from the ballroom, followed by raised voices. Reginald seized the moment, bolting past her toward a side door that led to the gardens. Miss Marple didn't follow. Pursuit would yield little now, and his flight only confirmed his guilt, or fear. She turned to Dolly, who was already chattering about the crash, claiming it was likely a dropped tray. But Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere, piecing together Reginald's panic, the glove, and the study's disarray. Had he been searching for the same notebook Victor now held? Or was he running from something else? Perhaps the letter's threat about Vienna. Dolly's sudden appearance was another puzzle. Her gossip was rarely innocent, and that bracelet twisting suggested unease. As Miss Marple made her way back to the ballroom, the conservatory's humid air clung to her, a reminder of the secrets blooming in the manor's shadows. Reginald's flight, Dolly's prying, and the unseen notebook wove a tighter net around the truth. The crash in the ballroom awaited her investigation, promising another piece of the deadly puzzle. This chapter closes with Miss Marple returning to the chaos, her resolve unshaken as she hunts for answers. Stay tuned as the ballroom reveals its next secret, and the killer's trail grows clearer. Chapter 8. The Crash and the Clue Miss. Marple hurried back toward the ballroom, the humid warmth of the conservatory giving way to the cooler, drafty corridors of Hawthorne Manor, where the wind outside howled like a distant wolf, rattling the ancient window panes and piling snowdrifts against the stone walls. The crash she had heard echoed in her mind, a sharp, shattering sound that cut through the murmur of voices, suggesting something more deliberate than a mere accident. Her grey gown swished softly as she moved, her steps quick but composed, her sharp eyes already scanning ahead for signs of disturbance. The manor seemed to hold its breath. The festive decorations, garlands of holly twisted with red ribbons, flickering candles in silver holders, now appearing almost mocking in the face of the unfolding tragedy. Reginald's frantic flight through the garden door lingered in her thoughts. His wild eyes and evasive denials painted him as a man teetering on the edge of confession. But Miss Marple knew better than to chase shadows blindly. The glove, the study, his absence, all threads leading somewhere. But the crash demanded her immediate attention, perhaps unveiling another layer of the mystery that had claimed Thomas Reed's life. As she re-entered the ballroom, the scene before her was one of controlled pandemonium, the once elegant space now a tableau of startled guests frozen in various states of alarm. Shards of crystal glittered on the marble floor like fallen stars, remnants of a chandelier arm that had apparently broken loose, sending a cascade of glass and wax tumbling down near the grand Christmas tree. Candles had sputtered out in the fall, leaving wisps of smoke curling upward, mingling with the sharp scent of extinguished flames and the underlying metallic hint from the earlier bloodshed in the library. Guests clustered around the debris, their faces illuminated by the remaining chandeliers, a mix of curiosity and fear etched into their expressions. Constable Hargrove knelt amid the wreckage, his stout frame huffing as he examined the pieces, his uniform dusted with fine glass particles. "Nobody touch anything," he barked, his voice strained with authority he barely possessed. This could be sabotage, another attempt perhaps. His words sent a ripple of gasps through the crowd, and Miss Marple noted how quickly suspicion turned inward, eyes darting from one masked or now unmasked face to another. She edged closer, her unassuming presence allowing her to navigate the throng without drawing undue attention. Her black domino mask still in place, though many others had shed theirs in the heat of the moment. Lord Hawthorne stood nearby, his broad shoulders tense, his crimson mask long discarded, revealing a face flushed with anger as he berated a servant for not checking the fixtures earlier. "This manor is centuries old," he growled, "but that doesn't mean it falls apart on its own." Lady Evelyn hovered at his side, her emerald gown slightly askew, her peacock feathers drooping as if wilted by the night's events. She clutched a handkerchief to her chest, her eyes wide but calculating, glancing not at the wreckage, but at the faces around her, as if assessing who might have orchestrated the mishap. Miss Marple's gaze sharpened on her. The earlier whispered conversation with Colonel Bantry, the slipped key. Could this crash be connected, a diversion or a warning? The Colonel himself was helping Hargrove, his bear-like frame bending to pick up a twisted metal hook from the debris, his military precision evident in his movements. "This hook looks tampered with," he muttered, holding it up to the light. "File marks, fresh ones. Not an accident, Hargrove." Dolly Bantry, who had followed Miss Marple from the conservatory at a discreet distance, fluttered into the circle, her butterfly mask dangling loosely, her voice a trill of excitement mixed with feigned horror. "Oh, heavens. First a murder, now this? It's like a curse on the Hawthorns." Her words were loud enough to carry, stirring more murmurs, but Miss Marple caught the glint in her eyes. Gossip as a weapon, perhaps, or a shield for her own secrets. Dolly's pearl bracelet twisted in her fingers again, a telltale sign of nerves, and Miss Marple wondered if her trailing Reginald had been mere curiosity or part of a larger scheme. Nearby, Clarissa Hawthorne lingered on the periphery, her silver gown catching the flickering light, her face pale as porcelain. Victor Kane had reappeared at her side, his black velvet mask adjusted, his arm protectively around her waist. But Miss Marple noted the bulge in his coat pocket, likely the notebook, still concealed. His eyes met hers briefly, a flash of recognition, and she sensed his wariness, as if he knew she had seen more than she let on. Kneeling carefully amid the glass, avoiding the sharp edges, Miss Marple examined the fallen chandelier arm herself, her magnifying glass brooch discreetly employed. The metal hook, as the Colonel had said, bore fresh scratches, not the patina of age, but deliberate cuts, suggesting someone had weakened it intentionally. But why? A distraction, perhaps, to draw attention away from Reginald's escape or Victor's hiding of the notebook, or an attempt to injure someone specific. The crash had occurred near where Lord Hawthorne had been standing moments before, according to a nearby guest's whisper. She spotted a small, overlooked item amid the shards. A button, brass, and engraved with a faint H, similar to those on the Hawthorne servants' uniforms, but slightly mismatched, as if from an older set. Pocketing it subtly, she rose, her mind racing. The button could implicate a servant, or someone posing as one, but its placement felt too convenient, a planted clue to mislead. The tension in the ballroom mounted as Hargrove ordered a sweep of the upper galleries, where the chandelier was anchored, his men clambering up ladders with lanterns in hand. Guests shifted uneasily, some demanding to leave despite the snowstorm, others huddling for warmth near the fireplaces. Miss Marple drifted toward Margot Vale, who stood apart as always, her skeletal frame in black, her skull mask giving her an otherworldly air. She was sketching again, her pencil flying across the page, capturing the chaos with eerie accuracy, the shattered glass, the constable's puzzled face, even the subtle expressions of suspicion. "Another tragedy for your art, Miss Vale?" Miss Marple inquired softly, peering at the drawing. Margot paused, her cold eyes lifting. "Art sees what others miss," she replied cryptically, tilting the page slightly. In the sketch, a shadowy figure lurked in the background, near the staircase. Could it be the saboteur? Margot's detachment was cracking, her hands steady, but her voice holding a note of something deeper, perhaps resentment or knowledge. As the search above revealed nothing but dust and cobwebs, Miss Marple's thoughts coalesced. The crash wasn't random. It tied into the murder, an escalation to silence prying eyes or destroy evidence. Reginald's flight, Victor's notebook, Lady Evelyn's key. The pieces were aligning, pointing to a conspiracy rooted in the Hawthorne family's hidden debts and scandals. The button in her pocket was a new lead, perhaps leading to the kitchens or servants' quarters, where alliances might be bought or broken. The night was far from over, the snow trapping them all in this deadly game, and Miss Marple felt the killer's desperation growing, like the storm outside. This chapter draws to a close with the ballroom's wreckage cleared, but the mystery deepening. The crash unveiling tampering and fresh suspicions. Miss Marple, undeterred, turns her attention to the servants' quarters, where the mismatched button may unlock the next door in this labyrinth of deceit. Stay tuned as she delves further, closing in on the heart of the Masquerade's dark secret. Chapter 9. The Servants' Quarters. Miss Marple slipped away from the ballroom's lingering chaos, the glitter of broken chandelier glass and the hum of nervous whispers fading as she navigated a narrow service corridor toward the servants' quarters. The air grew damp and chilly, the manor's opulence replaced by plain stone walls and the faint smell of coal dust and boiled cabbage. Her fingers brushed the brass button in her reticule, its engraved H, a quiet clue that tugged her toward the underbelly of Hawthorne Manor, where those who polished the family's facade might know its cracks best. The storm outside raged on, snow battering the small high windows, sealing the manor tighter than ever. Her grey gown blended into the shadows, and her steps were soft, deliberate, as she followed the faint clatter of pots and muffled voices. The servants' quarters, tucked behind the kitchens, were a maze of small rooms and narrow passages, a world apart from the glittering ballroom, but no less rich with secrets. The corridor opened into a cramped common room, lit by a single oil lamp that cast a feeble glow over a scarred wooden table. Two maids, their aprons stained and faces weary, sat whispering, their heads snapping up as Miss Marple entered. One, a young woman with red-rimmed eyes, clutched a teacup. The other, older and sharp-featured, stood quickly, smoothing her skirt. "Beg pardon, miss," the older maid said, her voice wary. "Guests ain't meant to be here." Miss Marple offered a disarming smile, her tone gentle but probing. "I seem to have lost my way, my dear. I found this button in the ballroom. Perhaps one of yours?" She held up the brass button, watching their reactions. The younger maid gasped, then quickly looked away, while the older one's eyes narrowed. "Not ours, miss," she said curtly. "Ours are plain. That's an old one from years back." Her words were clipped, but Miss Marple caught the flicker of recognition. The button wasn't just a clue. It was a spark that lit fear in their eyes. She pressed further, keeping her voice soft. "Such a dreadful night, with poor Mr. Reed's death and now the chandelier. Have you heard anything unusual? Servants often see what others miss." The younger maid, barely more than a girl, bit her lip, her hands twisting in her apron. "We don't gossip, miss," the older maid snapped, but the girl blurted, "I saw Mr. Reginald in the back stairs earlier, before the scream. He was angry, shouting at someone." The older maid glared at her, but Miss Marple nodded encouragingly. "Shouting at whom, my dear?" The girl hesitated, then whispered, "Couldn't see, but it sounded like a man. Something about money owed." Miss Marple's mind flashed to the letter in her reticule. Vienna debts must be paid, and Reginald's panicked flight. The puzzle was tightening, but the second voice remained a shadow. A sudden clatter from the adjacent kitchen drew her attention. She thanked the maids and moved toward the sound, entering a steamy room where pots bubbled on a massive stove, the air thick with the scent of roasting chestnuts and grease. A footman, his jacket missing a button that matched the one in her hand, was scrubbing a pan, his movements tense. Miss Marple approached, her demeanor unthreatening. "You've lost a button, young man," she said, holding it up. His face paled, and he dropped the pan with a clang. I don't know how it got there, ma'am," he stammered. "I was in the ballroom earlier, serving drinks, but I swear I didn't do anything." His fear was genuine, but Miss Marple noted his calloused hands and broad shoulders, strong enough to wield a letter opener or tamper with a chandelier. "Did you see Mr. Reginald tonight?" she asked. The footman swallowed hard. "He told me to keep quiet about him being in the library earlier. Said he'd pay me, but I didn't take it. I swear I left before anything happened." The footman's story aligned with the maid's. Reginald in the wrong place at the wrong time, entangled in something dangerous. Miss Marple's thoughts churned. The button could be a plant to frame a servant, or the footman was deeper in the plot than he admitted. She recalled Victor Kane's notebook, Lady Evelyn's key, and Margot Vale's sketches, each a piece of a larger picture. The servant's fear suggested they knew more, perhaps of debts, scandals, or even the killer's identity. As she turned to leave, a shadow moved in the corridor, a figure retreating quickly, too tall for a maid, too swift for Hargrove's men. She didn't follow. The manor was a trap, and she needed to tread carefully. This chapter closes with Miss Marple stepping back into the corridor, the button and the servant's words adding weight to her suspicions. Reginald's presence in the library, the footman's fear, and the fleeting shadow point to a conspiracy closing in. Stay tuned as she confronts the heart of the mystery, where the final pieces fall into place. Chapter 10. The Masquerade. Unmasked, Miss Marple emerged from the dim corridor of the servants' quarters, the brass button tucked securely in her reticule alongside the crumpled letter, its damning words about Vienna debts echoing in her thoughts like a persistent refrain. The manor's ancient timbers creaked under the assault of the unrelenting snowstorm, which had transformed the world outside into an impenetrable white veil, trapping everyone within these walls of deception and despair. The air carried a chill that seeped beyond the physical, laced with the lingering aromas of festive excess. Roasted chestnuts from the kitchens, the faint smoke from extinguished candles, and the underlying sharpness of fear sweat from the guests. Her discoveries weighed heavily. The footman's reluctant admission of Reginald's presence in the library, the maid's whispered fears, the planted button designed to shift blame downward, Victor Kane's furtive handling of the stolen notebook, Lady Evelyn's trembling exchange of the key with Colonel Bantry, Margot Vale's eerily precise sketches, and Reginald's desperate flight into the snowy night. Each element was a meticulously gathered clue, and now, with the Masquerade's illusions shattered, Miss Marple felt the moment had arrived to confront the heart of the darkness. She straightened her modest grey gown, adjusted her black domino mask, which she had kept as a symbol of the evening's deceptions, and made her way back to the ballroom, her steps purposeful yet unhurried, her mind a clear canvas upon which the full picture would soon be painted. The ballroom, once a whirlwind of laughter and swirling masks under glittering chandeliers, now resembled a stage after a tragic finale, its opulence dimmed by lowered lamps and the psychological weight of the night's horrors. The grand Christmas tree stood sentinel in the corner, its baubles dulled by dust from the chandelier's fall, its candles snuffed out to prevent further mishaps. Garlands of holly and ivy hung limp from the walls, their red berries like drops of congealed blood against the green. Guests clustered in small, uneasy groups, their finery wilted, gowns creased, suits rumpled, masks discarded like shed-skins on tables and floors. Whispers darted like shadows, theories of the killer's identity bouncing from one huddle to another, while Constable Hargrove's deputies, ill-equipped for such intrigue, shuffled about with lanterns. their searches for the missing notebook yielding only frustration. Lord Archibald Hawthorne dominated one corner by the massive fireplace, its flames crackling fitfully, casting harsh shadows on his stern face. His tailored suit was dishevelled, his broad hands clenched into fists as he barked orders at a trembling butler, demanding updates on his wayward son Reginald. Beside him, Lady Evelyn Hawthorne leaned heavily on his arm. Her emerald gown faded in the low light. Her once vibrant peacock-feathered mask crumpled in her lap, her eyes hollow with a mix of terror and calculation. Across the room, Clarissa Hawthorne sat primly on a velvet settee near the Christmas tree, her silver gown pooling around her like moonlight on snow, her delicate hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles whitened. Victor Kane hovered protectively at her side, his black velvet mask adjusted to conceal unease, his accented whispers meant to soothe her, though the telltale bulge in his coat pocket, Reed's notebook, betrayed his own secrets. His sharp features were taut, his eyes flicking toward the doors as if anticipating pursuit. Colonel Bantry paced nearby, his military bearing unbroken despite the bear mask long tossed aside, his thick fingers absently toying with the small brass key Lady Evelyn had slipped him earlier, a key that Miss Marple now knew unlocked more than a mere safe. Dolly Bantry fluttered about her husband like a moth to flame, her butterfly mask dangling from a ribbon at her wrist, her pearl bracelet twisting incessantly in a rhythm of anxiety, her chatter a thin veil over her probing curiosity. Margot Vale remained the outlier, perched on a stool in a shadowed alcove, her skeletal frame enveloped in black, her skull mask pushed atop her dishevelled hair like a crown of morbidity, her pencil scratched relentlessly across her sketchbook, capturing the room's desolation with strokes that seemed almost prophetic, her cold eyes detached yet burning with an inner fire. Reginald's absence loomed largest, his garden escape into the blizzard a desperate bid for freedom or flight, the monogrammed glove in the study a breadcrumb of his involvement in the debts, but not the murder. The footman, hovering near the service doors with downcast eyes, shifted nervously, his missing button a pawn in a larger game of misdirection. Miss Marple paused at the threshold, surveying the scene with the quiet authority of one who had unravelled many such knots in quieter village parlours. She cleared her throat softly, yet the sound cut through the murmurs like a knife. Heads turned, scepticism mingling with desperate hope in their gazes. Constable Hargrove, red-faced and outmatched, straightened from his futile inspection of a side table. "Miss Marple, what's this now?" he grumbled, but his tone held a plea for assistance. She stepped forward into the circle of light, her voice steady and conversational, as if discussing a knitting pattern rather than a killer. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll indulge me, I believe the time has come to lift the final veil on this masquerade of murder. Thomas Reed's death was no impulsive act, but the culmination of buried scandals that festered like wounds beneath the Hawthorne family's polished surface." The room fell into a hush, the only sounds the pop of embers in the fire and the distant howl of wind. Miss Marple began methodically, her words weaving the clues into a coherent narrative. Reed, the journalist, was a hound for secrets, his notebook a ledger of ruinous truths. It detailed the Hawthorne debts, vast sums lost in Reginald's gambling dens, and a failed steel venture tied to Vienna, where Victor Kane's shadowy past intersected with forged deals and unpaid loans. The torn page in the library with its scrawls of Hawthorne, debt, Vienna, was Reed's hasty note during a confrontation. The unsigned letter I found in Lord Hawthorne's study, "Vienna debts must be paid, or the truth will out," was a blackmail demand Reed had received, or perhaps drafted himself to leverage information. She drew the letter from her reticule, unfolding it for all to see, the elegant script drawing sharp intakes of breath. Lord Hawthorne's face darkened, confirming the family's entanglement without a word. Reginald argued with Reed in the library before the scream, as the footman overheard. Shouts about money owed, threats of exposure. Panicked, Reginald searched the study later for the letter, dropping his glove in haste, but he fled the scene unarmed and alive. He didn't strike the fatal blow. The footman, coerced with promises of payment to lie about Reginald's presence, lost a button from his old uniform, planted amid the chandelier shards to frame the servants and divert suspicion downward. A clever but flawed ruse. The footman nodded miserably, tears welling, as Hargrove's men eyed him less harshly now. Miss Marple continued, her gaze shifting to Victor. "Mr. Kane, you slipped away after the murder, retrieving the notebook from the tower room where the killer stashed it momentarily. You sought to bury your own Vienna connections. A bankrupt scheme Reed was unraveling, one that could doom your engagement to Clarissa. But theft is not murder. You acted out of self-preservation, not bloodlust." Victor's jaw tightened, but he offered no denial, his hand instinctively guarding the pocket. Miss Marple turned to the chandelier's sabotage. The hook's fresh file marks weren't for injury, though it nearly claimed Lord Hawthorne, but a timed distraction. As guests rushed to the crash, the killer moved freely, ensuring the notebook's safe passage to Victor, or deepening the chaos to cover tracks. "Lady Evelyn, your whispered fears to Colonel Bantry, that Reed knew too much and the notebook could ruin us, stemmed from your own indiscretions. An affair Reed documented, poised to shatter your marriage and the family's reputation. The key you gave the Colonel unlocked a safe in the study, hiding love letters that corroborated Reed's findings. Colonel, your loyalty to the Hawthorns blinded you to the deeper plot. Your bluster a shield for friendship, not complicity." Lady Evelyn gasped, collapsing against her husband, who held her stiffly, his eyes stormy. The Colonel pocketed the key with a grunt, his face a mask of regret. Dolly's bracelet twisting halted, her gossiping tongue silenced for once. Clarissa buried her face in Victor's shoulder, the web of betrayal ensnaring even her innocence. Miss Marple's eyes finally locked on Margot Vale, whose pencil had frozen mid-stroke, her sketchbook trembling in her grip. "And you, Miss Vale, the reclusive artist whose eerie detachment fooled us all. Your sketches of the library, the letter opener, the shadowy killer, too vivid, too immediate. You were there, hidden in the alcove, witnessing Reed confront Lady Evelyn about the affair. As her closest confidant, perhaps a lover yourself in the shadows of high society, you couldn't bear the exposure. In a flash of protective rage, you seized the Hawthorne letter opener, symbolic to frame the family, and plunged it into Reed's chest. The scream was yours, feigned to summon the crowd while you rifled his pocket for the notebook, stashing it briefly before Victor claimed it. Your art wasn't mere observation. It was a subconscious confession, each line a stroke of guilt. Margot's face contorted, her cold facade crumbling as she surged to her feet, sketchbook spilling to the floor in a cascade of damning illustrations. The murder frozen in ink, Reed's shocked eyes, the bloody opener. He would have destroyed her, Evelyn, my only true light in this wretched world, she cried, her voice breaking into a sob. The Hawthorns' debts were collateral. Reed's real weapon was her secret, our secret. I acted to protect what mattered. The room exploded into chaos. Gasps, shouts. Hargroves bellowed orders as his men seized Margot, wrestling her flailing form toward the doors. She spat defiance, her skull mask tumbling free, revealing a face twisted by obsession and regret. Lord Hawthorne roared in fury. Lady Evelyn wept openly. Victor surrendered the notebook with a resigned nod, its pages confirming every accusation. Debts, affairs, blackmail schemes intertwined like the manor's ivy. Miss Marple stepped back, her work done, as the constables secured Margot and the storm outside began to wane, dawn's faint light piercing the snow-laden windows. The masquerade was truly unmasked, the killer revealed not as a family member or outsider, but the silent observer whose loyalty turned lethal. The manor's dark heart, debts from Vienna's shadows, an illicit affair, a journalist's relentless pursuit, had been laid bare, freeing the survivors from its grip. Hargrove, humbled, thanked Miss Marple profusely, promising a full investigation now armed with truths. The guests, drained but relieved, began to disperse as roads cleared, the Christmas masquerade ending not in joy, but in justice. This final chapter closes the tale of Miss Marple's clue at the Christmas masquerade, with every secret unveiled and the killer brought to light. Thank you for joining this twisting journey of intrigue and revelation. Grab a cup of tea, reflect on the clues, and stay tuned for more stories. If you've enjoyed unraveling the mystery with us, please like, comment below with your favorite twist, and subscribe for more. Your support means the world to us and helps bring these tales to life. Until next time, keep questioning the masks we all wear.